Thank you for joining us. The following program is presented by Rico Cortes.
Shalom, we're going to come back now. We're going to continue talking about the copper laver. Now, we covered almost everything in the temple. We still left a lot of information because there's so much. We're not going to be able to do it now, but we're going to continue on the series of our teaching. We're going to cover a lot of information. But right now, we're going to finish with the watches, Levitical watches, and the temple courts, and the copper laver. Now, in the first temple, copper laver, it says, the first temple, okay, it says, during the first temple period, King Solomon made a number of unique innovations of the court. Solomon's seat, it used to be called, constructed of copper, was a large round vessel that stood on 12 oxen made of copper. 3 ox faced north, 3 south, east, and west. Some opinion maintain that the sea served as a ritual bath for the priests, and others state that it served as a reservoir that provided water for the use in the court. According to the opinion that the sea served as a ritual bath, it was located outside the court, which is it's only an opinion. See, additionally, King Solomon fashioned 10 ornamental copper wagons called mechonot. Each wagon carried a laver filled with water. 5 mechonot were arranged in a line of right of the ulam. The ulam is the door of the temple, so it's to the right, in the line to the right of there. So, and 5 to the left. So there was 5 here and 5 there. All right. What you see on the screen there is the second temple copper laver, right to the south, to the southwest of the altar, or the outer altar, and you see it there. They have a laver, they have a cistern. Okay, very important. Now, the copper laver and stand, which stand in the temple courtyard between the sanctuary and the outer altar, defined in Exodus 40 verse 7 and Exodus 40 verse 30 and 32. In the first of the temple vessels to greet the priests each morning, they were the priests wash their hands and feet before proceeding to attend a daily offering. You have to do it. You got to wash your hands and your feet. Exodus 30 verse 18 says, "And you shall make a laver of copper and its pedestal of copper." Okay. Now, what's interesting is they made a mechanism because in the temple, if you have still water and it's not moving, it's not living water. And you have to use living water in order for that to be valid. So if you were baptized in a baptismal in your church and there was no running water, it just filled it up and that's it. Well, guess what? You're not baptized because it's not a legal baptism. First of all, you got to be running coming in and water coming out. Water coming in, water coming out, and you're not supposed to be dunked backwards. You're supposed to go down 3 times and you do a blessing. So you're not supposed to be dunked, okay? But if the water's not moving, it's not a valid ceremony, okay? Keep that in mind. A mechanism was done in the temple with a cistern so that they will always get water in the morning because the water that stayed there the night before, and they put new water into the laver. That way it maintained itself as kosher water. In other words, living water. A mechanism called the Muchni mechanism of Ben Katin was a large pulley shaped like a wheel by which the entire laver was lowered into the well at night and pulled up in the morning filled with fresh water, because underneath the temple there's a water reservoir, and it has a distinct sound that the priest could hear as a wheel turned. This device was made by one of the high priests of the second temple by the name of Ben Katin. Okay? Now, beyond the brazen altar stood the laver. And the brazen altar is the outer altar. And it was also made out of brass, the metal which prophetically portrays judgment. So brass or copper means judgment. Okay? At the brazen altar, men were judged by the law of Elohim, but at the laver, they judged themselves. The laver was made out of polished mirror brass so that the one who watched could see himself, and it was a place of introspection and one who entered the tabernacle. The brazen laver appeared to be a prophetic picture of mikvah, immersion. See, Elohim identified as such on the day of Pentecost when 3,000 were mikvah on that day. The number 3,000 corresponds to the number of unit of water that took to fill the brazen laver which stood in the courtyard of Solomon's temple. So it took 3,000 of their measurement in order to fill up the outer laver in Solomon's temple, and there was 3,000 people who came to the knowledge of Yeshua, who accepted Yeshua because they already kept Torah. Now, a description of the laver was given by first century historian Flavius Josephus. He quotes, he says, Solomon also cast a brazen sea, whose figure was that of a hemisphere. The brazen vessel was called the sea for its largeness, and the laver was 10 cubits in diameter, and cast of the thickness of a palm. So it was this thick. Okay? Its middle part rested on a short pillar, round about 12 oxen, and looked like four winds of heaven. 3 of each winds, having the hinder parts depressed, so that the hemispherical vessel would rest upon them, okay, which itself was also depressed round about inwardly. Now the sea contained 3,000 bath. In other words, 3,000 baths. That was the measure of unit use. 2 Chronicles chapter 4 verse 5 also details it this way. It says, one of the thickness, it was of a handbreadth. Okay? And of the thickness of it, it was a handbreadth. And the brim of it was like the work of a brim of a cup, with flowers and lilies, and received and held 3,000 baths. That's what the Bible speaks, 2 Chronicles. Okay? Now, what's interesting here is that when you make the laver of brass, you find that in Exodus chapter 30, verse 17 and 18, you have to understand that copper and what it means is a Hebrew word in the Strong's 5178, which means basically copper, but it typifies spiritually as judgment. Okay, very significant. So when you go back to Exodus 30, verse 17 all the way to 21, it tells you about how to make the laver. Very significant, which typifies sanctification. You cannot go into the holy place if your hands are not washed and your feet are not washed. So that's what you see in some of the Psalms. How shall we go up to the house of the Lord? Well, with clean hands. That's really what I was trying to tell you. He's utilizing something that was known in the first century, and back then in David's time, in the tabernacle of David, and then later on in Solomon's temple, so you understood what it is. Okay? Now, the laver, a large vessel which appeared like a kettle, is actually the first vessel which the priests have contact with every day. For they must sanctify their hands and feet for its water before commencing any sacred task in the holy. You have to do it. If you cannot go and do anything unless you wash your feet and your hands. Interesting. Now with this all, swine flu, whatever is going on, people tell you got to do very simple steps. Wash your hands. Do you realize that everything was established by the Hebrew people because in the temple that was very well known for cleanliness. Okay, so this is nothing new. Now, the original laver, which was constructed for the desert tabernacle of Moses' time, included 2 spigots for releasing the waters, like a 2 faucets like thing. Okay? In the era of the second temple, the high priest, Ben-Katin, who fashioned the laver, also fashioned 12 faucets. So that would be more than 2 priests doing it at one time. So you can have more priests doing everything at the same time. You don't have to wait for everybody. So that the entire shift who participated in the offering of the daily sacrifice may sanctify themselves at once. So they did everything in a quick manner. Exodus 38:8 says this, and he made the laver of brass, and the foot of it brass, of the looking glasses of the women. In other words, the mirrors. Okay, which assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. Could this be possible? What the apostle's talking about in the letter says that we are like the mirror. We look at a mirror, but then when we turn around, we don't know. When we turn around, we don't know what we saw. We forget quickly. Because that was an example of the laver. You can see yourself. You can see the reflection of yourself. It's trying to use as an example. Okay? So this is very significant. It typifies judgment, and you have the opportunity to be sanctified. Now, in John chapter 13, verse 1 to verse 10, it talks about the evidence of Yeshua on the feast of Passover, Pesach, doing the same thing to the disciples. In verse 5, he says, in that he poured into water into a basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with a towel wherewith he was girdled. That's verse 5. Now, Peter didn't want this done. But in verse 8 says, Peter said unto him, thou shalt never wash my feet. Yeshua answered him and said, if I wash not your feet, you have not part of me. And then verse 10 says, Yeshua said to him, he that washeth needed not save to wash his feet, but is clean everywhere. You are clean. Okay, but not at all. Okay, for he knew who should betray him. In other words, there were people there who basically, they were still in their hearts that were not doing the right thing. So here we see something very significant is that Yeshua, in fact, what he was doing, he was sanctifying their hands and their feet on Pesach, because you do wash your hands during Pesach, and you should be able to wash your feet on Passover only. Now, what's interesting is, if you have a pastor, and you really want to know the heart of your pastor, it's very simple. When Passover comes around, is he willing to wash your feet? Now, in the Passover, women should wash their women's feet and men should wash men unless it's your wife. No other man should be washing your wife's feet. Okay, you got to have order. Okay, so if you do the washing of the feet, make sure that you wash your wife's. Okay, and women wash each other's feet, but men, you wash men's feet. All right. So as we see here, these are parallels. What have to do with the Messiah when he came to do for us, that now we are a nation of priests, according to what the Bible tells us in Exodus chapter 19, verse 5 and 6, and 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9 and 10 tells us about that. All right, let's continue here. Now, there is a specific concern of the loss of biblical purity with regard to the copper laver, although the same problem can affect certain other vessels as well. Anything left overnight in a sacred vessel becomes unfit for the use in the morning. Okay, so if you leave the water overnight, it becomes unfit. It's not moving. It's not living waters. So how do you fix it? If the water was left in the laver overnight, the priest would not be able to sanctify themselves with this water. Thus, the laver had to be emptied of its content at the end of the day. But how could it be refilled quickly enough of water? In addition to this priest who officiate at the removal of the ashes, all 12 priests who will soon be offering the daily morning sacrifice must also wash their hands and feet at the laver, okay? Now, High Priest Ben-Katin, who served during the era of the Second Temple period, devised a system whereby the problem of ritual impurity being circumvented, the mechanism of the mukhni, meaning machinery, or possibly derived from the word to prepare. Okay, by emptying the laver of its content from the previous day and then submerging it into a specially made pool under the court. You see, there was a pool under the court. Fresh water was obtained for the new day when the laver was hoisted up by the first priest in the morning. He who goes up to remove the altar of ashes, when the other priest in the court on the other side of the altar heard the sound of the machinery, right, raising the laver, they exclaimed, "The time has arrived." In other words, they will take the whole laver and they will put it down through the hole in the temple court, which will lead down to a cistern where there was living water, and they will bring it back up. And they said, "The time has come." Meaning the time of sanctification has come. For our colleagues has now reached the laver. This was a signal for them to prepare themselves to begin to do their service, because now they're going to sanctify themselves. You see, so this is very significant as we go on and we see how much order there was in the temple as we see this. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the Levitical watches, and this is going to be it for us in this aspect of the temple service. And I tell you what, I'm delighted, man, to be able to come to your homes and teach you about the temple service. This is really my passion. This is what I've been studying for 12 years. And every day I learn something new. It's amazing. Okay? Now, the Levites were to be available and prepare to carry out the service of the temple. Unoccupied with other pursuits, and their tasks were divided. Some guards over the temple, some are the gatekeepers, opening the temple doors at the start of the daily service and locking them at the close of the day. The Bible states, "And they, the Levites, shall be your associates, and they shall be entrusted with responsibility for the communion tent." Numbers 18:4. So there was a temple guard. Did you know that if Yeshua would have been arrested by the Romans, Yeshua would have been disqualified as the Lamb of God? Because you see, the Levites, the temple guard, they were getting ready for Passover, so they were ritually pure. They were ritually pure. So therefore, it was not the Romans who arrested Yeshua, it was the temple of the guard, the Levitical guard that used to keep track of everything in the temple. Now, with these words, God instructed Aaron and commanded of establishing watches in the holy place. Unlike ordinary guard stations or checkpoints, these watches were not for the purpose of guarding against intruders such as enemies or robbers, but rather to glorify the honor and dignity of the house of God. In other words, nobody stole there. Nobody came in to rob, but that was just to show this is the house of our king. It's guarded. So as a priest, guarding the house of the king was a great privilege, okay? Now, if one would not expect to find the palace of an ordinary king or nobleman to be left without an honor guard, how much more so would so be the practice fitting to have an honor guard in the house of Yahweh? This is very, very important. Now, altogether, watches were kept in 24 locations throughout the Holy Temple. 21 of these were manned by the Levites and 3 by the priests. Okay? Now you know there are different families of Levites. There are the Levites, and there are the Levites that are descendants of priests, of Aaron. Okay? So 21 were by the Levites, and 3 were by the priests. Okay? The tractate Tamit and Midot enumerates the location of these various watches throughout the temple. And most of the information is based on information contained therein and expounded upon by various commentators of the oral tradition. Now, it's interesting because the people who arrested Yeshua was the temple guard. So it gives us an evidence that the Brit Hadashah, the renewed covenant, is talking about evidence from the first temple. Let's move on. It may also be of interest to note that the scholars of the Temple Institute of Jerusalem have researched and documented the precise location of these stations using a computerized blueprint of the temple complex itself. Now, the Levitical guard stations, there were 5 groups of Levites stood guard at the 5 gates leading to the Temple Mount. Okay, there were 5 gates leading to the Temple Mount. So you have the Huldah gate, there were 2. There was 1 gate, the Kiponos gate on the west. Then you have the Teri gate on the north. And you have the Eastern gate on the east, the Shushan gate. So you have 2 on the south, 1 on the west, 1 on the north, and 1 on the east. So you got 5 gates. The Levites were put there as the temple guard. Now, the double Huldah gate on the southern side of the Temple Mount, these 2 gates were called after Huldah the prophetess in 2 Kings 22:14, who sat between them during the days of the first temple and told her prophecies to the people entering and exiting the temple. These 2 gates served as the main entrance and exit for the Temple Mount from the south. Okay? Since the majority of the building and activities were on the southern side of the complex, most of the traffic was through this side, and thereof 2 gates were necessary to accommodate the flow of people. The Kiponos gate on the western side, where the western wall is now, was most likely named after the benefactor who contributed to the funds for its construction. Although some authorities maintain that the word is derived from the Greek garden work, and that a rose garden was located in the proximity of this garden, this gate also facilitated entrance to an exit. Now the Tadi gate on the north, unlike the others, this gate was not used for gaining access to and from the temple. In fact, in the language of the Mishnah, it served no purpose at all. According to some of it was built exclusively for decoration purposes, okay? And added its beautifying of edifice of the temple. But other scholars maintain that a priest who inadvertently became defiled and thus would have to cease his service and exit the holy area of the temple in order to purify himself by immersion would exit the temple right through the Tadi gate, okay? And the word means modesty or secret in Aramaic. The word tadi in Aramaic means secret or modesty. So if a priest was defiled, he will go through the northern gate so nobody will suspect anything, that, no be ashamed, okay? The eastern gate, okay, it's very important, located on the eastern side of the Temple Mount. This gate featured a massive illustration of Shushan, the capital of ancient Persia. Okay, which was created in honor of the Persian king that ruled in the land of Israel during the first days of the second temple, having granted permission for the rebuilding of the temple. Now, it was through this gate that the high priest would escort the red heifer. And Yeshua comes all about that. Because Yeshua will go to the Mount of Olives. You see, Yeshua was on the Mount of Olives. He got arrested. Around midnight, he was taken back from the Mount of Olives, a holy place, because they had an altar there for the red heifer. Then he was taken back to the mount, going west on the eastern gate. There was a big bridge there. They believe there was a bridge there that will go from the eastern gate to the Mount of Olives. And there he went from the Mount of Olives to the temple, from the temple to the Mount of Olives, where he died. He died, he was buried on the Mount of Olives, he resurrected on the Mount of Olives, he ascended from the Mount of Olives, and he will come back down on the Mount of Olives according to Zechariah 14. Now the red heifer is important because it's for sanctification, okay? Now the entire entourage of priests and assistants to the Mount of Anointment. The Mount of Anointment is another name for the Mount of Olives. You're not going to find that word in the Bible. Okay, it's a word that has been used all through history. The Mount of Anointment, that's what they used to anoint the priest on the Mount of Olives, in the Mount of Anointment. Okay, the priest was burned, and the process of the ritual for purification of the red heifer. Now, in addition to the 5 gates, 4 shifts of Levites also stood guard duty at the 4 corners of the Temple Mount. You got 4 corners in the Temple Mount, and that's where they were. Okay, on the inside corner along the mountain wall. And by the way, if you go to Jerusalem right now, you go to the southernmost corner of the western wall, you see a remnant of the corner where the priest used to stand, okay, to either blow the shofar or to stand guard. Okay, you can still there. Another 5 ships, remember there were 24 total, 21 by the priests, and there were 3 by the Kohanim. Okay, another 5 ships watch at the 5 gates of the court. There were 5 gates in the court, okay? The remaining 3 watch stations consisted on 1 shift in the chamber of sacrifice, 1 shift in the chamber of the curtain, and 1 behind the Holy of Holies. So you have one, where the altar was, behind the Holy of Holies to make sure nobody will come in there. To let you know what? That when you come to the presence of the Creator, you have to do it the way He told you. Okay? The chamber of the curtain was used by those who waved the curtain of the curtains of the temple. This exact location is unknown. Okay? Now, the watchmen could not be caught asleep in their watch. The sages of the Mishnah, Midot 1-2, provide a vivid description of the nightly routine of the temple, the holy temple, with regard to these watches, in the manner in which they were rendered. Check this out. Each night, the supervisor and all the watch patrols the Temple Mount, inspecting each and every watch. Burning torches are borne before him in order for the guard to recognize that it is he. And if perchance he encounters a watchman who does not rise up before him, the supervisor cries out to him, "Peace be unto you." Okay? Now, but if the supervisor receives no reply, it is obvious that the guard has been caught asleep. You don't want to get caught asleep in the temple. Okay? He will then wrap the sleeping Levite with his stick. The supervisor was even empowered to set his covering on fire as a punishment for not carrying out the duty properly. Okay? Everyone within the earshot who heard the cries of the unfortunate sleeper will say, "What is that noise in the court?" "Oh, it is the sound of a Levite who has been wrapped and his covering set alight, but set on fire, for he has fallen asleep on his watch." And I believe this is what the Bible is telling us about us. Paul is using that example for us not to fall asleep. Now, the 3 locations where the priest, the Kohen, stood watch were the chamber of Abtinas to protect about the incense, the chamber of the spark, and the chamber of the fire. The first 2 locations were structures built into the side of the courts, like the upper lofts. It's like second story. The chamber of Abtinas is to the south, where the incense was offered up on the golden altar in the sanctuary was prepared. It was called after the priestly Abtinas family, who were entrusted with the sacred task of compounding the ingredients and creating the incense for the service. This chamber was located on the south side of the court, directly over the water gate, called also because it was through this gate that the golden flask of water was brought up on the temple from the Shiloach, from the pool of Siloam on Sukkot, during the festive of the water libation. If you want to know more about this, you can purchase my DVD. It's called Yeshua, the Well of Living Waters, and I talk about this. What was happening, that Yeshua says, "If anyone thirsty, drink of me." They were going through the water gate. It's a huge ritual that was happening on the last great day of the feast. Now, the chamber of the sparks was located in the north of the court. Here, a small fire was kept burning to provide the fire, which burned perpetually atop the altar. The watches in both the chambers of Abtinas and the chamber of the spark were manned by young priests who had not yet reached the age of the official temple duties. That means 25 to 30. That age, they were the guards, okay? The place of the fires was likely situated on the north side, east of the chamber of the sparks. This was not an upper loft, but it was a very large room covered with a dome roof. A great fire was kept burning here at all time, okay? And in the screen, you'll be able to see the locations of those things as we keep going. You got the chamber of Abtinas, which is the second story. The chamber of the fire, which is left, if you're looking from here, to east is to my left, right over here, and the chamber of Abtinas is to the upper second story on the right, okay, if I'm looking from inside the holy place. Now, this is very interesting. The place of the fire also housed the sleeping facilities for those on duty in the temple, like the priestly dormitories, okay? So the place where they kept the fire, that's where the priests slept all through the night, the ones that were not on watch, and they kept warm by the fire that was lit. Whichever family division will be responsible for the next day's service, come morning's light, will sleep in the room the night before. Some will sleep on the floor, and some specially constructed bunk beds. Wide slabs of cut stone were built into the wall and of this room, extending out to in alternating, overlapping fashion like steps, one on top of the other, so that none extended over the other. The elders, being more sensitive, will sleep on these stone slabs. The younger priests sleep on the floor, since each family clan held exclusive authority for the temple itself in the days of the service. Now, those elders also kept the keys. Listen to this. It's very important because the book of Revelation speaks about this. Keep the keys of the court, of the temple courts, gates with them in this chamber. So now, let's talk about the keys of the temple. There was a special place that the elders kept the keys of the temple in there. Okay? Within the place of the fire, okay, which is northeast of the temple, was an opening in the floor that measured 1 square, about half a meter square. Now, it's about half a meter square. Okay? And it says this opening was covered over by a marble slab, which could be removed. A metal ring was fixed into the slab, and it could be removed by pulling on the ring. On the inside of this marble tablet, a chain was attached. This chain held the keys to the gates of the court. Very significant. Okay? Now, when the time came to lock the gates of the court at the close of the day, the priest who guarded the chamber raised up the marble slab, took out the keys, and locked the gates of the court from the inside, from where he stood at his watch. Okay? From within the place of the fire. Now, outside the Levites stood guard, for at the place of the fire, the priests watch from within and the Levites from without. In other words, the Levites watch from the outside, and the priests watch everything inside. After he finished locking the gates, he returned the key to their place, covers up the stone with his cloth, and sleep on top of the spot. So he will sleep on top of the place where the keys were held. You find this in the Mishnah, Midot 1:9. Now, could this be a prophetic shadow picture of the key that Michael the archangel will use to lock and unlock at the end of days in the book of Revelation? In Revelations 20, verse 1, 2, and 3 says this, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand." Well, John is using something he understood from the temple service. And it says, "And he laid hold on the dragon and the old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up. And set a seal upon it." What is a seal? The marble slab on top of that. That he should deceive the nations no more. Until the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and he must be loosed for a little season. So could it be possible that the prophetic picture in the book of Revelation chapter 20 verse 1 and 2 is basically something that they're using as what happened in the temple when the priest, the elder, basically there was a messenger who would sleep on top of that square that had a chain with the keys of the temple. Interesting, something to think about, okay? So could this be a prophetic shadow picture in that day of Messiah of the key in reference in Isaiah 22? Let's talk about that. Isaiah 22, verse 20 says, "Shall come to pass that in that day I will call my servant, okay, Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, the priest," right? "And I will clothe him with thy robe, and strengthen him with thy girdle, and I will commit thy government to the hand, and he shall be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the house of Judah. And the key of the house of David will I lay upon his shoulder, so he will open and none will shut. He will shut and none will open." Who knows? That could be a prophetic picture of that. I'm just trying to mention that for your only information. Now, I'll tell you one thing. We've covered a lot of ground. So far, I have over 4 hours of teaching only on the daily sacrifices and what was going on in the temple service. We're not talking about the day of Yom Kippur in the temple service. We're not talking about the day of Passover in the temple service. We're not talking about Pentecost, and we're not talking about the Feast of Trumpets, okay? Or Sukkot. We're going to cover that. This is going to be, a teaching that I'm going to be doing here for a long time. So it's something that I think you're going to really gain a lot of information and a lot of learning, and going to be able to start comparing notes in how to understand the Brit Chadashah from a Hebraic perspective, from temple service perspective. Remember, Yahweh loves you. Yeshua is truth. Yahweh is truth. His Torah is truth. Shalom Aleichem. We'll see you next time. And the Lord of creation bless you. And I hope and pray that you've been blessed with this teaching on the day in the temple service, and the daily sacrifices. Shalom, shalom. We'll see you next time. If you want more information, you can always go to wisdomandtorah.com, or you can send me an email at www.wisdomandtorah.com. My email is there. Or you can go wisdomandtorah@yahoo.com. You can either send me an email. And I hope and pray that this teaching has been a blessing to you, to have a greater understanding of the temple service. Keep watch, because after this, I'm going to keep coming out with more teachings about the feast and what was happening in the temple during the feast. Shalom, shalom. Take care of yourself. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
If you would like more information about Wisdom and Torah and any other future teachings, please visit www.wisdomintorah.com. Now we leave you with the Aaronic blessing. Shalom.
Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha Yair Adonai Panav Elecha Vichunecha Yisa Adonai Panav Elecha Ve'asem Lecha Shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you shalom. Amen.